This is week 3 of working on Mom's desk. The planer quit working, but I figured I could sand each side of these boards nice and smooth on the drum sander. I'm going to be resawing these and then edge gluing them together, and the sander worked quite well. Then I resawed each of the boards in half until I had enough boards to meet the dimensions that I needed. And then I took those back to the sander. I would have preferred to plane these at this point, but this would have to do. So I put those through the sander again and again and again, and I love this sander, by the way. Then I edge glued 3 boards at a time to make 4 of the pieces on the list of parts. The desk has 2 manuscript boards, and I thought it would be really cool to make those extra special. For one, I thought a cross would be super cool. So I made it like I've made some other cross projects by cutting the cross pieces in a different unique wood. I'm using monkey pod for the cross, which is the same wood I'm using all over the desk. And where they meet in the center, I sanded 45-degree angles. Then I added a strip of walnut around the edges of the monkey pod to set it apart. And I clamped them up until they dried. Then took a look at it, and I added some more walnut at the ends of each piece. Then I took some more pieces, which were some different maples and some yellow heart, and there may be some other mixed wood in there, but I'm not sure what it is. But I glued them together, and I did that for each area that's going to go around the cross. And here is what I had when they were dry. I cut them to length and decided things just may be stronger if I had them glued to a backer board. So I transferred it to a 1/4 inch, or maybe it's even a little bit less backer. Then thought about the second manuscript board. I decided to take the easy route and just make that one with plain old boards. However, the plan calls for these to be made out of oak plywood, so I think it will still be special being made from monkey pod. But first I had to glue some boards together. And while that dried, I went back to the cross and started gluing it all together onto the backer. I used my speed square, checking to make sure the cross pieces were at 90-degree angles, and clamped it all together. I had to use one long board and clamp each end down to help keep the pieces flat when I cranked up on the clamps. And that worked really well. It was just tricky getting it clamped in place. Then I glued the top pieces on, again using the speed square, and tried clamping it, and then tried using a bean bag, but both of those moved the pieces too much, so I just left them. Then I went back to the other manuscript board, which is dry by now, so I could add the top piece that was a bit wider. I decided to add a small strip of walnut in between these just to add a little excitement to it. The plans for this come as 4 large sheets. I've taken pictures and printed off more manageable size directions, but some stuff is hard to see in the pictures I printed. I needed to move it so I could cut more pieces and add them to my pile. And here are some more of the pieces that I cut. Then I was back to the cross. I needed to add a few pieces that were missing, so I used wood glue and Starbond CA glue to make the job quick. Then I cut around the cross right at the tip of each part of the cross, and since I was adding more to the outside edges, that meant I needed to glue it to another backer. The very outside boards, however, will sit outside of that second backer, so it won't be seen from the side. Then I clamped that up. And by this time, the other manuscript board glue was all dry. Then I moved on to cutting some tenons. I first cut some slots on the table saw, then finished them off at the bandsaw. And for the mortises, I used the router table. I sanded off the fuzzies on the boards that fit in those mortises or slots. And now I'm not really sure if they would be called mortises in this case. But anyway, then I assembled those together, just dry fitting them and seeing my mistake, which I will get into later. For now, it was time to sand the cross. Since it has 2 levels of backer board, I needed to sand quite a bit to make it flush. And I knew the cross wood was plenty thick enough to sand. So I ran it through again and again, and the sander sanded and sanded and sanded and sanded until it was finally flush with the outer wood. Well, seems that every machine I use, I break. Although husband told me It's not me. So the planer was broken. It turns out that a piece got lost. They discovered that, husband and the neighbor. And so husband ordered the part, got it working. Planer works great. Yes, it works awesome. But I just was using it and it stopped working. So, yeah. Now on to me and my learningness or stupidity. I'm gonna go with learning. I got 7/8 confused with 15/16 on the little marquee lines. So what that means is I cut these too short. So see the gap? Yeah. And also on the length, see how that sticks out a little bit? That right there is my 16th. This was another mistake. Kind of like the 15/16 thing. But anywho, I was talking to Hub about it and he said, why don't you use Bondo? Yeah! So I'm gonna Bondo all these because gaps are not going to happen. Yeah. And this is all inside and has to do with the frame and all that, so it just needs to be solid, and right now it's not real solid. I'm gonna get these ready first, and then I'm gonna put the Bondo on. And ready, I mean gluing. So I glued them up the best I could, staggering where I had cut the boards 1/16 too short, so each side had a board that went to the end. While that glue is drying and waiting for the Bondo, I'm going to move on to this. So I marked out the areas on the board. 5, 2, 4, 5. Then used my router to take out those marked areas, and I did that on 4 boards. By then the glue was dry and was ready for some Bondo. So I placed some Bondo on each of the areas where I cut the tenon in too far. Then went back to use the router to cut a mortise in 2 of the boards, and I am pretty sure these are truly mortises. Then I squared them up with a chisel. The Bondo sets up super fast, so then I was able to sand the Bondoed areas. And the boards were nice and solid now. On the back of this, it says that there's a tenon to fit the front stile. So I know that's a front stile. When I look on the little picture here, it shows a little tiny groove. So I'm gonna cut that now. So I added that into the boards that I had just done all that other stuff to. Then I laid those out to see how they go, and that is where I am now. Well, I'm understanding the directions or the pictures more and more. And the things I've printed off have been very helpful because then I can study them at night without having that big sheet. I'm finding that it doesn't call things by the same name throughout the sheets. So I'm having a hard time identifying this board right here. But I'm sure I'll figure that out as I progress. But I'm really happy about how the manuscript board turned out. I mean, wow, that looks so cool. And there was a gap here, and I lightly sanded it, and then I put some Starbond CA glue in there. And I think it looks really great. So I think that's gonna be so awesome. And then the other manuscript board, I haven't sanded it yet, but it has that piece of walnut in there to make it special too. So next week, my hope is to put all of this stuff together, which is the pedestal or the bottom part of the desk. So thanks for joining me, everybody. And I hope that you're finding things to do at home while we're trying to stay at home to let this virus die out. I tell you, it's crazy. God be with you all, and we'll see you next week for another progress update on the desk.